it wrote me. And that's not just a metaphor. Although I'm credited in the published book as the author, John Constable, in the preface, I say the Southwark Mysteries was revealed by the Goose to John Crow at Crossbones Graveyard on the 23rd of November, 1996. My shamanic double had somehow raised the spirit of a medieval sex worker licensed by the church, but allegedly buried in the unconsecrated Crossbones Graveyard, her bones unearthed when the Jubilee Line extension dug up the pauper's burial ground. So that is a nutshell, a capsule of the story I'm going to tell you. It's the story of how a very powerful trip of LSD, taken with intent, inspired this work, the Southwark Mysteries, epic cycles of poetry and mystery plays that in turn generated 23 years of magical works at the Crossbones Graveyard, which has led to its transformation from a derelict industrial site awaiting redevelopment to a protected shrine and garden of remembrance for outcasts, which was the intention. And all this was effectively, I would say, done under orders from the Goose. So very briefly what happened, on the night of the 23rd November 1996, I took a very large acid trip. I'd estimate 1,500 to 2,000 mics, which I wouldn't recommend unless you have a strong intention to change your life totally. I did a lot of preparation for it. I prepared all day. I knew I was on something like what people often refer to as a vision quest. I'd been researching the history of my area, Southwark, the area around London Bridge, which happens to be roughly 2,000 years old. So it was in 1996 clearly the way I wanted to write about the millennium, because it embodied 2,000 years of history right in my backyard. And I'd researched various things, the history of the Tabard, where Chaucer and the Pilgrims set off for Canterbury, or Southwark Cathedral, formerly the Church of St. Mary Overy, and the name itself conjuring both an early Christian saint married with a more pagan river goddess, the sites of prisons like the Clink and the Marshalsea, the sites of great theatres like the Globe. All of that was very much in my mind the night I took this trip. And early on in the trip, I began working with my alter ego, John Crow. I'd use this persona to write, to push the boat out, really, to go places where John Constable might fear to tread. And so I was writing as John Crow, and about 11 o'clock that night, 2,300 hours, I would say, the Goose made her appearance, not as an hallucination, but as an unmistakable presence who wafted in and completely took control of my psychic geography, took control of the trip. And my only choice from that moment was to surrender and serve her as best I could. As John Constable, my task was to be the scribe, to write it down. As John Crow, my task was to dance with her. And this is because she revealed her secret history and transforming vision in poetry, in verse. And yet the experience was of a dance between John Crow and the Goose, and that she danced him around the liberty of the Clink, this area outside the law of the city for 500 years, where theatres and bear pits and taverns coexisted with brothels that were actually owned by the church. And the women who worked in these brothels became known as the Winchester Geese, a word used 3 times at least by Shakespeare in his plays. Despite being licensed by the church, there is a legend that goes back to John Stow, 1598, which states that such women were denied Christian burial unless they were reconciled from those sinful ways, and therefore there was a burial ground far from the parish church. I knew nothing about that on the night of the 23rd November 1996. I'd prepared the ground. I didn't know what was about to occupy it. the Goose. So set and setting. This is a map, 1746, so a little later after the Liberty was closed by Cromwell. But it shows many of the key sites. Here, St. Saviour's, later Southwark Cathedral, and in the poem, the Southwark Mysteries, always the Church of St. Mary Overy, its original name. Here is Bankside, where the church's licensed brothels coexisted with the theatres and bear pits. And right on the edge of the Liberty, appropriately, because burial grounds are very often on the edge, we have here, it's called St. Saviour's Burial Ground. It was also known as the Magdalene Graveyard, and most popularly as Crossbones Graveyard. As I say, none of that was known on the night of the 23rd November 1996. So when the Goose was dancing me, first in mind, through all these places that I'd already researched, and then at 2 or 3 in the morning, she decided we were going to walk it in body. And so the 3 of us, really, John Constable, the Goose, and John Crow, walked the streets, scaring anyone else we met that night. And she led me to these places, to the Tabard, to St. Mary Overy Church and Dock, to the Globe Theatre, the Clink Prison. And finally, she led me to the gates of what looked like a derelict industrial site, and gave me to understand that this was the most holy place that we had visited. It was the least likely candidate for such a thing. But as we stood there peering through the bars of this iron gate at the rubbish blowing around and the rattling of the tin cans, I found myself singing John Crow's riddle, which you shall hear very soon. And in that, the Goose actually revealed the existence of the Crossbones Graveyard. That night, I believed, in some sense, she'd invented it, that it was a piratical name for her burial ground. It was only subsequently that I discovered not only that this was a real place, referred to by John Stowe, later known as the Crossbones Graveyard for at least 200 years. So this is from 1853, the very year it closed. It closed because it was described as being completely overcharged with dead. They couldn't fit any more people in. And by this time, it was established as the pauper's burial ground, no longer for sex workers, but for anyone too poor. The next thing I discovered was that, unknown to me, in the 4 years preceding this vision, Crossbones Graveyard had been dug up to build the Jubilee line, or rather the eastern part of the graveyard had been completely destroyed to build the Jubilee line extension electricity substation. If you ever take the Jubilee line from Southwark to London Bridge, you're traveling almost under Crossbones, and you're being powered by great electromagnets that were planted down among the bones. You see, if they wanted to raise the dead, it wasn't enough with Crossbones just to dig them up. They had to set off huge electromagnetic disruptions. And it clearly had its effect, because the Goose had appeared to me and changed my life. So this is about 5 years after the vision, and already other people also were starting to campaign for the Crossbones Graveyard. This was the time I actually came to rededicate Crossbones as sacred ground on the 23rd of June 2004. The very first Crossbones Vigil, which continues to this day, has been every consecutive month. So, having had this vision, having discovered that this was not simply a bit of acid weirdness, but that I had tapped into something very deep and powerful, I then realized that my duty was to serve the Goose. It took me a few months to trust her completely, but once I did, I completely surrendered. And that is the key to this kind of psychedelic work. You have to find something you trust completely, because they will demand total surrender. And so the Goose's project, she wanted to be remembered. There was mention earlier of dismemberment. Of course, the famous dismemberment of Osiris, and then his remembering by Isis. Isis, who figures very deeply within the Goose stream, which draws on many syncretic traditions. As in this, the first ever Halloween of Crossbones, This was a ritual drama based on the poems received that night and on subsequent nights leading up to the millennium, which was effectively to reclaim Crossbones as a sacred space. At this stage, the prospect of having a garden there seemed like a fantasy. The objective was to establish on the astral, in eternity, that this place had a real spiritual identity as sacred ground, the Halloween of Crossbones, an image of the goose, because she is, of course, imagined as a bird as well, but she is imagined as a whore, and the word whore was something the goose was very eager to reclaim through this work. The whore embodying both the highest and the lowest images of women in the goose's view, and certainly in terms of male desire and disgust, embodying those contraries. And these contraries, to use a Blakean term, are precisely what the goose has always worked with, seeking to reveal the sacred in the profane, the spirit in the flesh, eternity in time. And the Southwark Mysteries, as I've said, is a published work, an epic published work, so it's written down, but the goose would place it, often with crude jokes, firmly in the oral tradition. And that is important. And because this short talk is going to culminate in a performance of the poem received that night, The Book of the Goose. And when I perform it, it certainly trips me out, and it sometimes actually seems to produce psychoactive effects in others. So relax and take some deep breaths. And we'll take a trip in a minute. Right, so the Halloween of Crossbones, the ritual drama culminated in a procession to the gates of Crossbones, those old industrial gates which I had peered through that night, and already you see in a process of being transformed with ribbons bearing the names of some of the dead. We couldn't find the names of the original sex workers, but these are some of the paupers buried there in the 18th and 19th centuries, and their names are read out in ritual. And the object, of course, we bind the names to the gates and then release them in our prayers and songs and offerings, because our objective is not to bind spirits, but to open the pathways for the living and the dead. And so this took form in this book, The Southwark Mysteries, in 3 parts, an epic cycles of first poetry, and then mystery plays, and then a glossolalia, a kind of a torrent of occult lore connected with it. It manifested, the Goose said, we are going to perform this in Shakespeare's Globe on the 23rd of April 2000. She told me that about 2 years before it happened. I went and told Mark Rylance, who was then the director, who was initially quite resistant, understandably perhaps, with some mad writer turning up saying he was channeling the spirit of a sex worker who decided that she was to be honored publicly in Shakespeare's Globe. But sure enough, the Goose worked many miracles over the last 23 years. And on the 23rd of April 2000, which happened to be Shakespeare's birthday and Easter Sunday and St. George's Day, so this was a concatenation of significance, we performed the mystery plays. And they begin with Jubilee Line tunnelers digging up Crossbones, ripping the fabric of reality, through which comes the Goose. And later, here's the appearance of Jacqueline Haig as Satan, because the mystery plays co-opted the traditional medieval Christian mysteries and gave them a twist, which was that basically Shakespeare is come to Bankside to the liberty of the clink, to find the most wicked souls like the Goose and John Crow, in order to set off the day of doom. There's the Goose, played by Di Sherlock in the original production. Here is the Gate of Crossbones. In the very early stage, Morgan, a female infant, one of the names from the records, very plaintive. And this was when the gate, there was hardly anything there. Little by little it grew. And on the 23rd of June 2004, we held a rededication. Here, my friend Rod, who's entered the site illegally, setting up our altar, ready for the celebration. Within a few months, this was how the gates were beginning to appear. Later, when we told Transport for London what we were doing, their head of property came and said, this will have to go. at which point his communications manager stepped in, a woman, and stood up to her boss very bravely, saying, "That's not a good idea." It later turned out she had attended some of our vigils and got the message. So never discount the straight world either. Here we see, it's artwork by Jimmy Corty, showing the desecration of crossbones by the Jubilee line. Jimmy Corty from KLF, some of you will know. And here, a protective symbol of the goose. Now, is anyone in the audience who's got a watch they can read? Any of you out there? 5:02. Right, yeah, because I want to bring this in on time. So the poem takes about 15 minutes, okay. And with your permission, we're not going to go to, I think it's good to end with the poem. So if you want to question me, I'll be around tomorrow. So this is what happened. We began coming to the gates first for 13 consecutive Halloweens. These were all magical sequences. At the end of the 13th Halloween of Crossbones, a chevron of geese flew over Crossbones, honking, and everybody acknowledged that that work is done. But other work continued. The vigils beginning 23rd June 2004, and as I say, continuing to this day. The next one, 23rd September 2019. I'm doing 3 more, and on the 23rd of November 2019, I will complete 23 years of service to the Goose, and I will be handing it on to others who will keep this work going. Oh, thank you. I've had so much. It's been a very challenging work, but the most rewarding thing I've ever done with my stupid life. So one of the things that happened was Transport for London did try and keep us out. They kept putting security guards there. The first Halloween of Crossbones, there were about 20 security guards on the other side of the gate, waiting to fight us off and looking more and more embarrassed as people tied candles and said prayers, and lit candles, tied ribbons, said prayers, and sang songs. And so gradually the number diminished. By the 3rd year, there was just a Geordie called Maria who said, "Oh, give us a candle for the girls." And years later, Maria comes back and lights her own candles. Now she no longer minds the sight. But finally, they had this guy, the Invisible Gardener, as he became known, Andy Hume. He was living in a caravan on site. What TfL didn't know, Transport for London, TfL, what they didn't know when they got him to be their security guard was that he'd been Vivienne Westwood's gardener. And he was quite a character in himself. He started working on a garden. Meanwhile, he was listening to us, doing our vigils on the 23rd of every month, envisioning a garden. And finally, after I had been in Brazil, where I actually cleaned a graveyard in the Amazon, these things I believe are deeply connected, Andy Hume, the Invisible Gardener, came up to me out of the blue, I didn't know who the hell it was, and said, "John Crow, I've been watching you for 2 years. Don't look so freaked. I'm not going to rain on your parade, but you should know there is a garden." And he showed me the beginnings of the garden that he was working on. This is his mate Sydney, a Jamaican guy who worked on it with him. And Friends of Crossbones came and we helped. So this man who was meant to keep us off Crossbones ended up giving me a key, and we had a secret gate where we would come in. On the 23rd of April 2007, we had a rededication of Crossbones where we entered the site, all this without the owner's knowledge, of course. And as you can see, we performed various tantric rites, working also with St. George in his mystical form as a protector. He's a protector of many things, of course. He guards us against venereal diseases and mental disturbances. He's a very strong protector for spiritual works. And one of the things we did was create a shrine of the lost and found. So we began creating gardens and shrines on Crossbones without the owner's permission. And then eventually, because the neighbors were very supportive, until one neighbor finally threatened to, tried to blackmail me, saying, "What would TfL say if they knew what you were up to?" Well, what I was up to was cleaning up rubbish and trying to keep this place, give it some respect. So I wrote to TfL and told them that, gave them the option of keeping me off site and then paying someone Instead, at the time, they offered me a contract. They didn't pay me, but I had a contract saying I had the right to go on site. So this is how it's worked. This is Goose magic in action. And the work that I'm going to perform for you, the Southwark Mysteries, not only when I perform it does it have some kind of psychoactive effect, I would say, in that it makes connections and opens pathways, neural pathways, as well as pathways in space and time to allow eternity to manifest. Here we found a piece of old rock which serves as a graveyard, as a gravestone with no name, to remember all the forgotten dead. As the gate continued to evolve, becoming more and more magnificent as more people tied it, more different magical beings manifested, so many, including this, the Green Man of Bankside, who comes every year. We wrote a song for him. The Green Man is come to bless our garden with flowers and trees for future children. Oh, this was Gaggle, the all-female choir. They came and sang at our gate. I remember, actually, the angry neighbor tried to water bomb us during this one. And I remember saying to the crowd, are we afraid? No, we've got Gaggle behind us. And those girls lived up to their incredible feminine power. And so when finally, having tried to destroy our gate, finally, Transport for London, now they're trying to develop everything around Crossbones. Whereas originally they tried to develop Crossbones, the site is worth 30 million, by the way, to them, and priceless to the rest of us. They're now developing all around it. And as part of their development, as I say, their property manager didn't want our strange occult gate on their property, so they actually moved it 30 yards down the road without damaging a single offering. This was how far this strange organization, Transport for London, had been led into the world of the magic created by a medieval sex worker, transmitting her vision of transformation to John Crow. And so, out of this work, out of this absolutely uncompromising, and some would say completely bonkers magical work, came a manifestation, an actual garden. And so I commend it to you all as an act of magic. I'm doing 3 more, as I say, before I complete my work, so you're welcome to join us. Red Cross Mary, either the Blessed Virgin if you're a Catholic, or the Goddess if you're a pagan. But she's there to guard and receive, especially the children, more than 50% of the dead at Crossbones. And there were 15,000 of them, by the way. More than half of them were children. There I'm smudging just after we opened the garden to the public. And there's the new entrance to the garden, the Goose wing, created by Arthur de Mowbray. So now, because I want to complete this, and then go and see my friend Daisy Campbell. Actually, it was Daisy's giving a keynote speech at 5:30, so I want to bring you in by then. Where are we now?
20 minutes.
20 minutes is perfect. It was Daisy. Daisy was present when the Dean of Southwark came to perform an act of regret, remembrance, restoration at Crossbones, an extraordinary act for the church to perform, as well as having received the Southwark Mysteries into Southwark Cathedral, which caused them no end of trouble with fundamentalist Christians. So Southwark Cathedral, the Church of St. Mary Overy, have lived up to everything the Goose asked of them. And you'll see all that, because I will keep giving the odd click, if I remember, as I perform the poem, so you'll get a more random associative pattern of all this. Anyway, it was Daisy who came to that service, and she said to me afterwards, I suddenly realized it's kind of one of the longest performance artworks in history, isn't it? Because it's already more than 20 years. And I think that caught it perfectly. That's what it is. Because, again, Julia talking about the power of the oral tradition, and as I said, although this is written down, its real power is in performance when it's read aloud. And I think it has, in some strange way, the power to transform reality, in a small way, in a modest way, to turn an old dump into a place of beauty where people now come from all over the world to honor the outcast, dead and alive. So I'm going to have a sip of water, try and breathe, because my lungs, as you probably can hear, are fucked. But as long as I have breath, I shall use it for the goose. So let's all relax, take a few breaths, and go on a journey with the goose and John Crow, the first book of the Southwark Mysteries, the Book of the Goose. I was born a goose of Southwark by the grace of Mary Overy, whose bishop gives me license to sin within the liberty. In bankside stews and taverns, you can hear me honk right daintily as I unlock the hidden door, unveil the secret history. I will dunk you in the river and then reveal my mystery. And when our lords in Westminster denounce my impious blasphemy, my gob in the face of all God-fearing servants of his majesty, what though they throw me in the clink, or King's Bench, or Marshalsea, and leave me there to rot, they think, for brazen acts of harlotry? I call upon my bishop as defender of my liberty. When almighty city fathers, those dread guardians of morality, do ban all gaming, drunkenness, and acts of gross effrontery, what though they thunder over there? It matters not a fig to me. Over here's the ward without the law of London city, where whores are subject only to fair Southwark and her liberty. Oh, over there you'd swear they were the image of propriety. But row 'em over here, dear, and it's all rape and pillage and bondage and buggerage with molly boys, what jolly boys, and goose girls under age, taking liberties and license, dear. We all have to deal with them. We pump them and paddle them, and into bed we squeal with them. Let's all go bait the bear. What madcap tomfoolery, if it wasn't in the service of such a pox-ridden majesty. And when I hear those hypocrites decrying and denying me, who make of me the vessel of all known vice and depravity, the way they talk, I swear you'd think I was the whore of Babylon, as they make of me an altar they see fit to rape my children on. And a minister of morals, oh dear me, oh what a carry-on. Over there it's all the family, and go on and marry on. But when they're over here, dear, then every Dick and Harry on the front bench has some wench or rough trade from Borough-Lade, and every mag witch in Shoreditch has been poor St. Mary Overyd. And did they think my ghosts would not start kicking against the poxy pricks what had done all the pricking? How could they ever think they could sanitize me, dress up my clink to decriminalize me, turn me into their heritage theme park? Over here, dear. Want to take a walk down my dark alleyways and doorways, down my blood-fanny stream, and then it's whoops, Jack Shepherd with his silver blade gleaming and his one more body ditched in Thames water, dreaming. Yes, I've been here before, dear, oft times in chastened circumstance. I lay with Master Geoffrey at the Tabard, making dalliance afore wending on his pilgrimage to tell a tale of Canterbury. And I rode out beside him as the child of Mary Overy went riding for a vision of humanity, man, God, and beast, communing for one moment in eternity, and the healing of the sick, and the questioning divinity who asks herself, what am I to permit such wanton misery? And compassion for all souls that dwell in shadows of mortality, compelling her to take on very flesh of that infirmity, until she's born a crafty whore, stewed in a Southwark hostelry, and using all her wherewithal to take a pilgrim's fancy, and lay with him, and play with him, and open eyes to see the goddess that on judgment day shall stand by man and make his plea. And I was in that miller's wife, who pushed her tush at Absalom, who kissed him many a wench's lip, but nary such a hairy one. You don't know me yet, dear. You will, dear, I promise you. I am a tricksy tart, dear, My aim is to astonish you. John Crow with a riddle and a madcap rhyme, here to reveal my mystery. In London town at the end of time, Johnny go down on history. John Crow in Cathedral yard, cursed with my gift of prophecy, here to lay one last wild card for Southwark and her liberty. With a hey-ho, jolly Jack Crow and his merry, merry band of outlaws, oh, never stumble when he trips, mad clown of the apocalypse. And some go, ho, ho, who be this John Crow, this nobody rootless shaman, oh, kicking loose heels as the rank weeds grow, wild in our Southwark haven. And then the crow on the gargoyle, ah, 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 and he draw John a map of infinity, where God rejoices more in the brazen whore than in the wife in her pinch-faced chastity. With a knick-knack, paddy-whack, give the dog a Bible black, John Crow whores are hollering. In the sack on your back, give the skull a good crack, see if it's a hollow one. Click, clack, click, clack, don't look back to see if death's a following. For tonight in hell they are tolling the bell for the whore that lay at the tabard. And well we know how the carrion crow doth feast in our Crossbones Graveyard. With a hey-ho, jolly Jack Crow and his merry, merry band of outlaws, oh, never stumble when he trips, mad clown of the poca, 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 hey-ho, jolly Jack Crow and his merry, merry band of outlaws, oh. By the grace of Our Lady, Mary Overy, let them see. Them that sell their time to earn a daily crust to feed a family. Them that trade the future in stocks or bonds or speculate in property. Them that crunch the numbers on the number-crunching North Bank in the old city, then flood back across London Bridge to take their trains to Gravesend and the estuary. Let them see. In the hungry eyes of debtors doing time with Dickens' father in Marshalsea, the denizens of Bedlam now entrusted to the care of our community, the homeless in the subways and the dead-end kids from Old Kent Road to Bermondsey, in the skull-faced queers and junkies, and the tart who tested positive for HIV, the shining eyes of our goddess of mercy in the haggard face of John Crow, who watches from his high tower in Trinity, as in the single mother who lives across the road at number 23, the checkout girl in Superdrug, whose name tag says her name is Charity, and in every human face that is pocked and scarred by what we call reality. By the grace of Our Lady Mary Overy, let them see the shining eyes of our goddess of mercy. 3, 4, let war be waged without. Break down the door and out the prison wall. Let it all fall down to be born again at liberty. And let within the dream of skin, she that is without sin cast the stone. For we all have our stake in the sum of human misery, our messes and scraps and claptraps, those niggling, naggling, flibbity, gibbety, novelty, grovelty, mincy, queeny, artsy, fartsy, ooh, how nasty, minister, what's your private partsy? Party political, put Piggy in the middle, hump and jump and dump on him, pump him full of estrogen, put a time bomb under him, roast pork and bacon fat. How'd you like to chew on that? A down we ministry of sound, where we tribal dances, dear, what comes from underground isn't subject to the rule of fear. It must have given you a start to find me so lysergic, dear. When it comes to stealing hearts and healing rifts between our hemispheres, there's no trick I wouldn't pull to entice you. Over here. I tricked mad John Crow when he was in his ecstasy to lend me his voice to make known my prophecy that in the month July, and the day shall be 23, in the year of Our Lady Mary Ovary, Southwark shall arise, naked in her liberty, on the south bank of the Thames, arrayed in all her finery, with all her children endowed with grace and dignity, the deformed and the deviant embraced into her unity. With Lambeth below her, Blake's garden in eternity, she shall open her loins to make whole the concavity. Shall shuffle 2 right click, then shuffle left another 3. She'll strip the decks for one last sacred profanity, and the hypocrite shall blanch. Does she sanction such depravity? The great whore of Revelation, is not that surely she? Relax, dear. You're over here. Don't go busting an artery or poisoning me rivers with your self-loathing fartery. The body, we all know, dear, is privy to mortality. This flesh shall rot and wither, as you're so fond of reminding me. And when your kind's done, when you're done despoiling me, when you've had your fun, son, you've no further use for me, so pipe down, shut your mouth, show some respect, humility, and hearken to that silence. What is brimming with immensity, unspeakable, shall speak, and in one word unfold her mystery, pronounce the end of time and beginning of eternity, and all her children gathered there in all their multiplicity, with one voice shall speak her name, and her name is Liberty. Thank you. Thank you. That's me. I didn't finish the slideshow, but hey, there's Don Santos blessing Crossbones. There's Russell Brand the first time. He was my biggest fan for about 3 days. The Halloween of Crossbones. Ah, yeah, the vixens who were my bodyguard that night. I never felt safer. Some of the art that it inspired. Temple of Isis came there. The shard captured tantrically. We're nearly there. The offerings to the goose. Goose, may your spirit fly free. And so she does. My brothers, my sisters, thank you. Please come to Crossbones again. If you're interested, you can see my books are displayed somewhere downstairs on a table next to Danny Nemu's. If you pick one up, if there's no one there, just come and bring me some, and we'll discuss a fair price. Come to Crossbones. 3 more months before I stop altogether doing this. If I'm granted that long, I hope to be granted a bit longer. 3 more months, 23rd of September, October, November. Goose, may your spirit fly free. Thank you.
Thank you.